Stoked to welcome Cassie McDaniel. Cassie is the design director at Glitch. Glitch is a New York-based tech startup building a friendly, collaborative code editor. If you've not checked out Glitch's website, strongly recommend you doing that. It'll also kind of add so much context around the topic that Cassie is going to be talking about today. She's previously led distributed design teams. She currently, leads the distributed design team completely remotely from Orlando. And previously, she spent several years at the Mozilla Foundation. She has a long history of building tools to make the web a more creative and open environment. And today, Cassie will be talking all about the era of weird and wonderful. Welcome, Cassie.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I will get started. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. I think that this is really impressive, what you have built here, Preet and Chantel and the rest of the DesignX team. So thank you so much for having me. I just think it's been inspiring and enlightening and at times moving and just such an honor to be able to talk to everybody. Such an awesome crowd as well in the Slack. So thanks everybody for being here. I am going to talk about the era of weird and wonderful and through the means of soft brutalism, which hopefully all of that makes a lot more sense at the end of this. So this is me back when haircuts and butterfly conservatories were still available to me. I have done a number of things in my career. Preet mentioned a few of them. I'm currently design director at Glitch. I was previously design director at Mozilla Foundation. I've done stints at Adobe. I had my own studio. I worked in healthcare for a time, and I've done a bunch of community stuff. This is my oldest little weirdo, Amelia. She's 6. She is always making that face. This is Billy. She's 3, always making that face too. She's actually about to be 4, going to have a lockdown birthday here pretty soon. She has taken to writing things for me on Slack, which is pretty fun. And then of course my significant other, my weirdo Mark, who also does a very important job of stay-at-home dad. So I think more men should honestly do that. And so I just wanted to plug him. I also know that there are a lot of Canadians here. So though I'm based in Orlando, Florida, I wanted to brag a little bit that we are also a family of Canadians. We actually got our Canadian citizenship after we moved to Florida. So that's a little weird fact about me and a much longer story. But anyway, we're really proud of our dual citizenship. Again, back when we could travel, here's us in a yurt during our citizenship trip. And honestly, these days we are just surviving and not doing anything much more exceptional other than that. And that was probably true before all the COVID-19 stuff too, if I'm being really honest. So to all the other parents out there, I see you. It is hard. Anyway, enough show and tell. So I'm the design director at Glitch. If you don't know us, we are a collaborative coding site, kind of like version of Figma for code, aspirationally. We're still pretty young and small. Our big thing at Glitch is yes code, as opposed to no code, which you might have heard of through like Webflow and things like that. And we like yes code because it empowers everyone to build what they want. It doesn't hide the knowledge of how things work. It opens it up and sort of democratizes it for people. So like I mentioned, we're still relatively small, early startup headquartered in New York. I lead the design team it's a tiny little team of about 3 people, give or take a couple of part-time contractors. And altogether, we have a staff of about 50. We build a code editor that looks like this, where it is easy to remix and build on the work of other coders. So we have a fiercely loyal, creative, inclusive community. And that's, I think, one of the things that makes us different from other tech companies is that we really prioritize the kind of health and safety in our tools for all of our audience. So there's lots of cool things about our code editor, but one of the things that I like best is just how anyone can participate regardless of who you are, where you come from. And we, on the back end of that, make it a priority in building that community. People on our platform have made things like these apps, like this, the one on the top left that makes your computer screen go blurry if you're not sitting up straight. So that's kind of fun. Or this beautiful project from Luke Patton called Canvas Cards. It's just beautiful designs built in code. And then, other things like games or just experiments. The things that people make on Glitch really range from like meme generators to actual useful tools that you can use for your job. A lot of big brands use Glitch to embed code in their documentation. And you can do all of that on Glitch really fast, really easy. And you can do that just by building on the work of other people and remixing their code. So I'm relatively new at Glitch. I joined last November. And before that, there was a design team didn't exist. There were designers, but no design team. So when I was looking at the role back in November, I was researching the company and I came across this tweet from Ada Powers, who is a tech writer. And this tweet was really the genesis of this talk. I'm not a coder. I studied graphic design. So I think it took me a little bit longer to understand what was special about Glitch. And this tweet really helped. I've been pretty much thinking about this tweet ever since Glitch came across my path. And I'm a little bit obsessed with it because I feel like it encapsulates something about Glitch that's really special. The fact that it's kind of a weird aesthetic and that is what people really respond to. So I've been asking myself ever since, why is it that people do that and how is it that we maintain that? These are some of the illustrations from our old illustration kit before I joined. And people, our community, just really love Glitch's funky illustration style and UI. So this is some of the things that they were responding to. Some more graphics from our old illustration kit. It was if you took any kind of everyday object and added Google Eyes to it, it was pretty much Glitch's brand. But I, am a designer, and one of the things that I really love design, perhaps because I'm just such a messy person naturally, I'm always trying to simplify and try and find clarity. So I knew that going into Glitch, it was going to be a challenge for someone like me who, likes to champion good, clean, simple design. And that's what was kind of cool about Ada Powers' tweet, because in referring to Glitch as a sort of brutalist UI, being clean and simple are two really big attributes of brutalism. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that if you don't know what brutalism is. So don't worry, we'll get more into it. But definitely one of the most compelling things about Glitch was its weirdness. And that quality has gotten really baked into the Glitch brand. People just love how weird it is. So in thinking about my role and how I could help Glitch succeed in the world, and I knew that there were a few things that we could do that design could help with right off the bat. I mean, number one, Glitch is not really a tool for children. It needed to grow up a little bit in tone, and it needed to communicate that. Two, it never really said what it was, that it's a code editor and it's a community of all the things that people build with that code editor and that you can remix those things. So it needed to do that in both messaging and design a little bit more consistently and clearly. And then three, because we're a startup that has grown really quickly, we have 4 million apps on the platform now. Some of the UX has gotten a little complicated, so it needed to be a little bit easier to use and straightforward in that regard. So I knew that design could help in all of those ways, but I also knew that it needed to do those things without losing its soul. Maybe this is the parent in me, but I started to see Glitch as this sort of gangly teenager that, was going off to a party, and I was like the DD, and I needed to make sure that it would get home safely. And so that sort of safe and health of the brand, I felt like I was becoming a little bit of its protector. So anyway, that's the lens with which I am approaching some of this stuff. I wanted to go back and talk about brutalism a little bit, and then consequently, what is soft brutalism? Brutalism is a style of architecture. It was harsh. It was traditionally ugly style of architecture. I think everybody probably has seen a brutalist building. Everybody probably has one in their hometown somewhere. And it's really not for everyone. Some people call it the Marmite of architecture. I don't know if everyone knows what Marmite is, but I lived for a time in England, and my husband is British. And Marmite is a thing that you put on toast, or I don't know, God knows what else you put it on. Some people love it, some people really hate it. And it's just one of those things that either is or it isn't. And brutalism is kind of the same way. I think of soft brutalism as being a style that is similarly harsh, but also just has curves and maybe a little bit more texture. Another attribute of brutalism is just the materials that it's made out of. It's often a poured concrete, and that material being a sort of raw, textured quality. In UI, a common example of this is Craigslist, where, they just absolutely refuse to change the UI, no matter how many times it's redesigned in Dribble, on Dribbles. But so anyway, it's stark, it's straightforward, it's efficient, and to a large degree, it still feels pretty raw. There's not a lot of finesse to it. I found this other site that was kind of a neat example because it is both brutalist architecture and sort of this building. It was a pop-up store in New York that you could wander into and do your shopping, which honestly I would take right now. But it had these harsh lines, simple, straight, textured with a little bit of curve. And that's how I was starting to think about brutalist UI. A lot of people ask, is brutalism just bad design? And I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. If you look at the sheer number of ways that brutalist UI can manifest, it's actually really, really creative. There are instances of rigid grids, and sometimes it's just black and white. Other times it has bright, tons of color. Sometimes it's textured, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the grid is fairly balanced, like up on the top. Other times it's really extreme, like the single wide column that chooses to break all the rules of traditional typography. Sometimes there are geometric shapes, sometimes it's pixelated type. Others use photography, others don't. Sometimes it's blurry, sometimes it's outlined. Sometimes it's almost like if it doesn't evoke a sense of pleasure and beauty, if it's just discordant in some way, then that is brutalist UI. And it just goes on. I really recommend checking out this website for inspiration. Brutalistwebsites.com is great. So there are some traits that I think are debatable as characteristics to describe brutalist UI. And sometimes, sometimes it's this, sometimes it's not. But overall, I would say that in addition to the general discord of brutalism, I think of just raw honesty, of not trying to gloss over the details that make something a little bit more weird or human, or in the case of Glitch, sort of hiding the mess of the creative process. Things are messy when you build them, and that's something that I have always really loved about building things online. So I don't know if I will ever really know if this is true or not, but one of my hypotheses about Glitch's aesthetic was that somewhere near the center of this trend toward whatever you want to call it, weird, quirky, or even ugly design, I think, especially as it relates to tech or webby content, was that often there was this retro or vintage throwback vibe to it that conjures up this feeling from when the web was, I think, arguably a more creative medium, when people weren't just building with templates or putting up shops to make money. It was a little less commercialized and more experimental. People had niche hobbies that they just wanted to make a website for, or other niche communities that they wanted to connect with. So they'd spin up a little GeoCities or whatever. Here's another modern example of how that retro vibe is manifesting today. This is very recent, March of this year. I love this designer, Steph Davidson. She works at Bloomberg, which is also known for its sort of retro, quirky vibes and features and illustrations and animations. And I want to pause here because I've been, at Mozilla Foundation, I've been part of the maker communities before. At Mozilla, we were focused on teaching web literacy, and we built the WebMaker suite of tools to help onboard people to making things on the web. And one of the things that we discovered was that sometimes when UI looks really polished, it can be very intimidating. It shouldn't really be surprising, but I think that as designers, we can get our kind of blinders on and not really think about that first time experience. So that's definitely something that I bear in mind with Glitch too, which is used by a lot of students and educators and people learning to code for the first time. And so I think that the unfinished quality of some of this aesthetic that you see in Steph's work is really helpful for that kind of mission, where it lowers the bar for beginners and it's just easier to get started. I definitely think that we're talking about a little bit more than UI here. We're talking about values and trends and brand and how the aesthetic language of a software product becomes consumer friendly in 2020 by speaking a more contemporary language. So visual trends, I think, are often the first indicators of how people understand a product, whether or not they trust it, and how excited early adopters might even get by it. So I'm not sure if anyone recalls, but Jen Simmons, who is a design is she a design advocate? She's some kind of advocate, developer advocate, perhaps, at Mozilla Foundation. She had this amazing talk back in 2015, donkeys ago, right, about the boxiness of web pages and how pretty much all major websites had some combination of a header and 3 columns. I had done a similar talk around the same time about the singularity of design, where you have your big splash image and then some kind of headline, maybe a subparagraph, and then a CTA of some sort. It's just like everything looked like that. You still see a lot of that today, but I think that since then, there's been a lot of talk about the box model and breaking out of that with our tools, using our tools to help us do that, and hopefully to enable more creative layouts and sort of implementations on the web. I think all of that has contributed to this trend toward aesthetic diversity and sort of unusual, less harmonious, maybe even uglier designs, or what Ada Powers calls brutalist UI. So I have definitely noticed over the past few months, and granted, I might be a little bit behind. I do feel like having kids, I've slowed down just a ton. But in the past few months, as I've been exploring new benchmarks for the Glitch brand and, thinking about how do we stay ahead of the curve and keep it weird. And also, as I'm looking at portfolios for hiring, there's definitely a few trends going on right now. And it's helpful to separate them out from one another so that we can know really what we're working with and where we can go next. Just to harken back a little bit, I'm not going to linger here, but skeuomorphism was a trend early on where we wanted to make UIs look more realistic, like a button that you would actually press. Not going to linger here because it really had, it really fell out of favor. What's more in favor now, I would say, is neumorphism, which is kind of an evolution of that. It's skeuomorphism, but abstracted as if it's floating in space. It's just a little bit gentler. Tobias Van Schneider wrote this article just this last week about the Japanese concept of kawaii and how we're building that into products. It's like this cute design manifesting in 3D shapes. And again, a lot of lighter, more harmonious colors. This was an image from his article. And, this should look very familiar. It's very unoffensive design. The colors are bright, type is clean. The UI usually has a primary color palette that's supported by various shades of gray. You might even recognize it in illustration style, where everybody had purple skin and that whole aesthetic. I love the evolution of that, like a more extreme version of that. This Eva Kramer's website was sent to me by a designer on our team, Kristen, who has the best taste. And I just love this website. It's so fun, so playful and experimental. Definitely check it out. It's really immersive. And honestly, I think we could use more of that kind of playfulness in our mainstream products. I think that would be fun. So in contrast to that is something that still has, bubbly shapes and fun and typography, but is a little bit more of a retro vibe and, more a kind of fatter type, a little bit more of a muted color palette is what Elizabeth Goodspeed had tweeted was Peak Fruit Sticker, which I thought was funny. And then building on from there, there's a little bit more of an extreme, darker, almost sci-fi version of that, a little bit more futuristic, still slightly retro vibes and a little bit brutalist in that regard, but a little bit more futuristic. This is a version, I think, of that in a more kind of sassy product kind of way, where there's a slightly discordant UI, but there's still typography. There's still hierarchy. It's still very usable. It's just layered on with this random hand that's trying to get you to accept cookies. And then lastly, to tie things back to soft brutalism, I'm looking at a lot of things where the palette is a little bit gentler and more pastel, and the motion is just kinder. There's some discord and visual disharmony, but we're also kind of getting used to it, and it's kind of starting to feel good. So that's an interesting place to be. And then here, just a more extreme version of that with a bit more texture. So bearing all of that in mind, I'm going to jump into that far spectrum of trends, the brutalist, harsh, ugly, weird corner of the grid. And I'll share some of the ways that we're trying to be responsibly weird at Glitch, because I think weird can be either powerfully good or powerfully bad. So I'll talk a little bit about the difference. So Nielsen Group published this guidance a couple of years ago, I think now. And I'll just read it. So to leverage the brutalist style, keep it limited to visual design. Don't break your visual hierarchy, navigation, or interaction design just for the sake of novelty. I like this part. And stick to pure brutalism while avoiding anti-design like the plague. It'll be for your business metrics. So I don't know. Maybe it's because I don't like being told what to do. But I also think this is a little bit nearsighted in that weird definitely makes us uncomfortable. And I agree that usability should not be uncomfortable, but definitely parts of the user experience can be. And as long as that is done with intent, I think that can be done responsibly. So it's definitely a balance between what is sort of navel gazing in a way, what satisfies us as makers and creative people, and what satisfies our users as people who are trying to get something done. This is definitely a place in the UI where you should not be weird. Don't be weird with accessibility. That's just kind of mean, honestly. It's not inclusive. Like in this case, if I go back for a sec, in this case, we're using typography that obviously doesn't have great contrast. So that is something that we are fixing. We are also redesigning our global navigation at Glitch, and it's not going to be like this. This was actually a bug in the implementation, but I thought it was a really funny example of how not to do weird. Definitely should try not to be weird in your navigation or where users are trying to get around your product. So actually what we've designed is really quite nice, and I'm excited to launch it in coming weeks. Another interesting place to try and decide how weird to be is in your design system. So for us, we're looking at colors. We inherited this really large color system that was hard to maintain, hard to unify and sort of tell a cohesive story. Now that can be a brand attribute, but for somebody like us who are trying to move a little bit more towards simplicity, paring that down was an easy way for us to still have really bright and sort of off colors, but just on a lesser scale. Another way that Glitch is maturing now that we have a paid product, which we launched, I think, like a month ago, was trying to design in mini branding exercises. So we had this little mini branding exercise for the paid product experience. We came up with an icon set. These are actually just some iterations. We ultimately settled on a diamond, being that it didn't have any weird layered connotations that the star or the cube had. And when we were building this brand, we made it a really tight color palette so that it wasn't too distracting or weird. We gave it specific shapes and movement, and then we identified the places in the user journey where it made sense to build in a little bit more unexpected animation or motion or unusual design. In the checkout page, we were not going to get weird on people. People needed to trust that their money was going to a responsible place. But on the success page, after they have bought in and they want to be inspired, we totally would. In emails, we were not going to get weird in the receipt. But in the onboarding email, where we were trying to get people to take an action and be excited, there was definitely room for a little bit more play. In social graphics, there's definitely room to get weird. I mean, you see this in Super Bowl graphics all the time, that weird is definitely more acceptable when people are in the more consumptive headspace as opposed to when they're trying to get something done. The pricing page on Glitch is a good example of where we intentionally removed anything too weird. We wanted it to be clear and understandable, and that felt just like the kind of brutalist quality of things being honest and real and super usable. So there was a nice little overlap there. And then lastly, I just wanted to share some of our progress work on illustration. So this is all really fresh and new and in progress and not final, but I thought it was fun to share just a little bit more behind the scenes. I have to give mad props to our illustrator, Aaron Fernandez, who's in New York and is working with us on evolving our illustration guidelines. So we're experimenting with all aspects of illustration to figure out what the next phase of weird looks like with Glitch. Weird is definitely one of our design values. We the phrase is just a little bit weird. So we're experimenting with corner and lines and shapes and fidelity and of course color, and seeing how that might apply to future Glitch interfaces. So again, really works in progress, but always fun to see behind the scenes. This is one of our more finalized illustrations, and it's a little bit weird in that not all the shapes and lines make sense or purposeful. There's extra layering, extra shapes, and it's definitely gratuitous in a lot of ways, but it's also bright and optimistic and hopeful. And in a way, because it is not super simple, it can be a little bit weird. And then Aaron's animations and motion are also a good examples of how we might build quirkiness into the Glitch brand in the future and be able to surface those things at responsible moments. And we are also starting to build this evolution into the materials that we're producing in-house. So here we designed a new guides team, avatar and background header, that just there's this element of consistency and trust for our guidance. So we can be weird in our aesthetic as sort of a consistent visual element. There's this kind of fun balance there to play with. And then lastly, I wanted to look a little bit at art. I always get a little bit arty in these talks, but I think it was worth pointing out that a lot of artists in the past, especially in the canon that we sort of hold up and revere, a lot of artists used the power of being a little bit weird to gain a reputation or to have greater success for their art. We see that in contemporary design too, Sagmeister carving into his own skin. I think that today, in 2020, part of being an interactive designer, where over the last decade, the public's design literacy has skyrocketed and design creative tools are just really common. Anybody can use them. They've been truly democratized, which I think is great. But that part of being a designer is no longer special. And it's honestly just opened everything up to what's going on around us. So this is a little bit convoluted, but if you follow what I'm thinking, that I think being weird today is actually a little bit more tied to authenticity, that we feel weird in our lives because that's just a part of being human. And as communicators, as people who are translating one thing from one thing to another, designers are often the first to recognize that trend and to use it as a medium to communicate culture. So then that weirdness becomes a currency. And so, knowing how to use weirdness becomes something that we're responsible for. And it also becomes a tool in the toolbox of design. So I'm personally very excited for it. I was reading this article in Psychology Today. It was titled something like, "Am I really weird?" Anyway, I loved it. The author said something like, all I can say with certainty is that you are human, with all the weirdness that encompasses. I love that. You see weirdness everywhere. You see it in art, you see it in pop culture, you see it on Twitter, and now you see it in our homes. And so why shouldn't it also be in the things that we are creating and producing every day? I definitely don't think that weird is a bad thing, where it has traditionally meant weird or other or you don't belong. I think that weird in the human sense or in the design sense also just means that you don't have to be like anybody else and you can make your own mistakes. And so I'm really looking forward to building on that open creative culture. And I hope that you will join me for that. I will definitely, I think I may have run over a little bit, but I'll be at the portfolio reviews. I'll be on Slack. So if you want to connect and build on some more weirdness, I am right there with you. And feel free to reach out to me in any way you best care to.
That was amazing. That was so, like, of course, aside from the learning aspect, I think it was just so refreshing because you shared, it was such a visual presentation as well. Really, really loved it. Thank you so much, Cassie. I actually grew up in a small town, or like small compared to Indian standards, not Western standards, like a small town in India, which was designed by Le Corbusier. So the architecture there is like very brutalist, but of course, growing up, you don't know that. And so I would usually be like, why is the code, all these buildings, like just gray concrete, large structures? Yeah, so that brought back a lot of the memories.
Yeah, it probably brings back a lot of memories for a lot of people. It is very, very prolific, right? It's such a common style.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much. Thank you for helping us start on such a refreshing topic, theme, and really inspirational as well. I'm sure a lot of us are going to go back to our portfolios and be like, nah, it looks too boxed up, too tight. Let's feel it and open it up.
Yeah, no, do what's right for you, for sure. It's not for everybody, but it is kind of a fun thing to play around with. Yes. But thanks so much for having me, Preet. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Same here. Thanks a lot.